Before America had cities, before the sound of factory machines or the glow of oil lamps, there was the steady heartbeat of water turning wood and stone, the sound of a mill. It was here, beside the rivers and creeks of a new world, that grain first became gold. The first mills of a new world. When the first English settlers arrived on the eastern shores of North America in the early 1600s, they carried with them more than just dreams of a new beginning. They brought the old knowledge of milling, for in their world, survival depended on the mill. Without flour, there was no bread, and without bread, there was no life. The very first American grist mills appeared along the cold, tidal rivers of New England. Simple wooden structures built from local timber, powered by flowing water. They were small, crude, and noisy, yet to the settlers they were symbols of civilization rising in a wilderness. A single pair of millstones turned endlessly, grinding wheat and corn into meal. Each revolution marked the fragile balance between hunger and survival. But not all grains were equal, and not all lands could grow them. In England, the word corn meant grain of any kind, wheat, rye, oats, or barley. But in America, corn came to mean something different. Maize, the golden crop of the native peoples. At first, English settlers struggled to adapt. Their beloved wheat withered in New England's rocky soil and short summers. So they turned to the corn and rye that thrived in colder climates. From these humble beginnings came new recipes and traditions, cornbreads baked in iron pans, and a strange local favorite called rye and injun, a mix of rye and cornmeal that filled stomachs and kept families alive through harsh winters. The settlers didn't know that rye carried a hidden danger, a fungus called ergot that could cause wild hallucinations and feverish visions. But hunger rarely left room for caution.
Still, the rhythm of life in the colonies began to form around the mill. Farmers brought their grain by horse or wagon, waiting their turn as the miller worked by candlelight, covered head to toe in a fine mist of white dust. In a world without supermarkets or supply chains, the mill was everything. It was where news was exchanged, debts were settled, and gossip spread faster than the stream that powered the wheel. The creaking sound of the water wheel, the hum of the stones, the smell of freshly ground flour, all of it blended into a soundscape that became the background music of early American life. The miller himself stood at the center of it all, half craftsman, half magician. He understood the language of the stones, how tight to set them, how to hear when the flour was burning, how to judge the quality of a grind with nothing but his fingers. They called it the miller's thumb, a mark pressed into his hand from years of testing flour. To have a miller's thumb was to bear the sign of mastery and of lifelong labor. While New England's rocky hills limited wheat production, the fertile lands further south became America's first true breadbasket. Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia produced wheat in abundance, their rivers lined with mills that would one day feed not only colonies, but nations. In those early years, every sack of flour was precious. The flour that came from these colonial mills traveled by wagon and ship, feeding soldiers, settlers, and distant markets. The Brandywine River in Delaware became one of the first great milling centers, its banks lined with water wheels. The rhythmic groan of wood and iron echoed through the valleys, the sound of industry born long before the Industrial Revolution. Each region developed its own style of milling. Dutch settlers brought buckwheat from New Amsterdam. Germans introduced hard rye and their sturdy mill designs. English millers favored soft wheat and white flour. Together, They created a patchwork of milling traditions that blended into something uniquely American. We often imagine the old mill as a peaceful storybook place, a rustic wheel turning under falling snow, smoke curling from the miller's chimney. But the truth was far harsher. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Rats scurried through grain sacks. The noise was deafening, and the danger ever present. One spark could ignite the flour dust and burn the entire structure to the ground in seconds. Yet for all its hardships, the mill stood for hope. Each turn of the wheel was a reminder that nature could be tamed, that water, wood, and stone could be bent to human will. And in that turning motion lay the seed of something far greater, the spirit of American invention. By the rivers of New England and the fields of Pennsylvania, a new kind of power began to stir. Not just the turning of a wheel, but the turning of a nation. Grain by grain, the colonies found their rhythm, and in that rhythm, the first heartbeat of American industry was born.
If you stepped inside an early American mill, you wouldn't hear silence. You'd feel motion. The entire building breathed and groaned, a living machine of wood, water, and willpower. The living machine. The early American grist mill was not just a building, it was a heartbeat, powered by nature itself. Water, once wild and uncontrolled, was trapped, guided, and channeled into motion. A stream became a force, spinning massive wheels that groaned against wooden shafts and gears, transferring life to the millstones above. These wheels were feats of human craft. Some turned beneath the mill in dark wheel pits. Others stood half exposed to the elements, splashing and steaming in the cold winter air. The most common type was the breast-shot wheel, a sturdy design that harnessed water striking midway up the wheel's height. To see one turning in full motion was to witness the perfect marriage of engineering and nature, both beautiful and brutal. Inside, everything pulsed with purpose. The crunch of wood underfoot, the hum of the gears, the whisper of flour dust swirling through shafts of sunlight. It was dangerous, dirty, and deafening, but to the people of the 17th century, it was the sound of progress. The millwright, the master of motion. At the heart of every working mill stood the millwright, the unsung genius of colonial engineering. He was a craftsman, an architect, a mechanic, and often a mystic of wood and water. Armed with nothing but hand tools, he designed the entire system, measuring river flow, cutting timber by eye, shaping gears from oak, and aligning shafts so precise they could turn for decades without failure. Building a mill took months, sometimes years. Every beam, every peg, every gear tooth was hand-cut and balanced. White oak was chosen for the main shaft, hickory for gears, apple wood for cogs, each selected with care for its strength and resistance to moisture. When the millwright's job was done, he left no signature. His mastery existed in silence, hidden in the turning of the wheel. It was said that a millwright's spit could kill a toad, a superstition born from the mystery surrounding their craft. No one dared question their methods, for to understand the mill was to glimpse secrets few men ever learned. The mill in motion. When the wheel began to turn, the entire structure trembled to life. The main shaft rotated a massive gear called the pit wheel, which drove smaller gears connected to the millstones. The stones themselves were miracles of craftsmanship, perfectly balanced, often imported from France or England, weighing thousands of pounds. The bedstone stayed still. The runner stone spun above it, grinding grain into fine meal. The space between them, no thicker than a fingernail, decided whether flour came out coarse or fine. To the untrained eye, it looked simple, but to the miller, it was a delicate dance between speed, sound, and feel. A skilled miller could hear when the stones were too tight or too far apart. He could touch the flour, rub it between his fingers, and tell its quality instantly. That instinct became his identity. His thumb grew flat and wide, the miller's thumb, a badge of experience earned through years of labor and endless dust. Custom mills and merchant mills. In early America, not all mills were the same. There were two main kinds, custom mills and merchant mills. Custom mills were humble, local, and deeply personal. Farmers brought their own grain, and the miller ground it for them in exchange for a portion of the flour, called the toll. A sixth of the wheat, or an eighth of the corn, was the standard fee. Because each batch belonged to an individual farmer, no one was allowed inside during grinding. The miller worked alone, silent, secretive, trusted, or sometimes feared. Then came the merchant mills, grander, louder, built for profit and export. These mills didn't just serve a village, they fed cities and nations. They ground grain in bulk, packed flour into barrels, and stamped them with hot branding irons. SF 196, superfine, 196 pounds. Every barrel bore its mark like a signature of quality. By the late 1700s, barrels of American flour traveled downriver across oceans, even to the tables of Europe. The merchant mill was more than an enterprise. It was a symbol of America's growing ambition. Inside the mill, work was constant and merciless. The air hung heavy with heat and flour dust, coating every surface like snow. Flour dust could explode if ignited. A spark from an iron nail or candle flame could turn the mill into an inferno. And yet, the miller worked on, blind to danger, driven by duty. By day, the floors trembled under the weight of turning gears. By night, the miller stayed awake, listening to the rhythm of the wheel outside, the eternal heartbeat of his craft. He knew every creak, every vibration, every change in pitch. The mill was alive, and he was its keeper. Sometimes, when the night was cold and the wheel turned slow, the sound of grinding stones echoed through the valley, a ghostly reminder that even in darkness, the work never stopped. Every part of the mill was handmade. The blacksmith forged metal fittings, bands, and picks to dress the millstones. He sharpened tools, repaired iron bolts, and built delicate instruments for the miller's trade. Together, the miller and blacksmith kept the mill alive, one through fire, the other through flour. Even simple tasks were physically brutal. Flour sacks weighing nearly 200 pounds were hoisted by rope and pulley, carried up narrow ladders, and emptied into hoppers above. Every floor was connected by trapdoors, and the miller climbed them dozens of times a day. By evening, his clothes were soaked with sweat and his hair powdered white with flour. He looked ghost-like, a spirit of labor trapped between wood and stone. The mill was more than a building, it was a soul made of water and wood, a monument to human endurance. Within its walls, men carved order out of chaos, turning nature's motion into nourishment. The creak of a wheel, the grind of stone. These were the sounds that built a nation. For centuries, the mill stood as it always had, powered by water, driven by muscle, bound by the limits of man and wood. But in the late 18th century, one man looked at that world of sweat and splinters and saw the future. For hundreds of years, the mill had barely evolved. Men still hauled grain by hand, lifted sacks up rickety ladders, and shoveled meal with aching backs. Every process, grinding, cooling, sifting, demanded labor, time, and patience. Even the grandest merchant mills remained tethered to human strength. It was a world of rope and sweat, where the rhythm of the wheel never stopped. But progress did. Efficiency was a dream waiting for a spark. The genius of Oliver Evans. That spark came from a restless Delaware inventor named Oliver Evans, a man obsessed with motion and with freeing the mill from drudgery. In the 1780s, Evans imagined something no one else dared, a fully automated mill, one that could move, grind, sift, and pack flour without a single man lifting a sack. Where others saw routine, he saw revolution. He envisioned machines that would feed each other, an endless loop of movement and precision. Evans wasn't just improving the mill, he was reinventing labor itself. Evans' genius took shape in a handful of inventions that would transform industry. The bucket elevator, a continuous chain of small wooden cups lifting grain upward like magic. The screw conveyor, a twisting wooden spiral that carried meal from one level to the next. The hopper boy, a gentle arm that spread and cooled fresh flour, sweeping in perfect circles. And the mechanical bolter, a rotating drum that sifted flour to flawless consistency. Together, they formed an unbroken system of motion. Grain entered at one end and emerged at the other, finished, packed, and ready for market, untouched by human hands. When the first Evans-style mill came to life, it must have seemed possessed. Grain rose, turned, and sifted through wooden chutes all on its own, a ghost in the gears. Millers, who once worked by candlelight and calloused palms, now watched the building move as if alive. Wood gave way to iron, water wheels grew stronger, and the hum of progress filled the air. Evans had done the impossible. He made the mill think for itself. In 1795, Evans published The Young Millwright and Miller's Guide, a book that became scripture for a generation of craftsmen. Within its pages were blueprints, calculations, and the philosophy of a new age. It spread across the young United States like wildfire, inspiring millers, engineers, and dreamers. Wherever there was running water and ambition, an Evans-style mill soon followed. Evans' automation came just as America's flour trade was booming. Merchant mills, larger, faster, more daring, became engines of wealth. Barrels of superfine flour rolled out of Brandywine Creek, stamped and branded for shipment across oceans. The Quakers, meticulous and industrious, dominated this trade. Their mills near Wilmington and along the Brandywine were marvels of order and innovation. Moral discipline turned into mechanical perfection. From these banks, America's flour fed the world. As Europe descended into chaos, revolutions, wars, and the long shadow of Napoleon, bread became scarce. American ships, their holds filled with white barrels marked superfine, sailed to feed the hungry across the Atlantic. In ports from Lisbon to London, American flour became gold. And behind every barrel was Evans' legacy, the hum of automation, the birth of industrial America. Oliver Evans didn't just transform the mill, he transformed motion itself. From the whisper of water wheels to the roar of machines, his dream carried the nation into a new century. The age of sweat gave way to the age of power, and the mill, once the heart of the village, became the engine of progress. Every revolution begins with a whisper. For centuries, the mill had been the voice of progress. Wood, stone, and water, turning in harmony. But time has a way of grinding even the strongest stones to dust. By the dawn of the 19th century, the heartbeat of the old mill was changing. The Iron Age of progress The wooden bones of the old world gave way to iron. Where once beams creaked and wheels groaned, now steel sang, sharp, efficient, relentless. The air inside the new mills shimmered with heat and metal. Hammers rang on anvils. Sparks danced like fireflies, and the scent of oil replaced the smell of sawdust. Iron did what wood could not. It endured. It spun faster, worked longer, and never splintered under strain. With every turn of the gear, humanity took another step away from nature and closer to the machine. The fall of the water wheel, the rise of the turbine. For centuries, the water wheel had been the symbol of power, turning rivers into rhythm, motion into life. But now it stood silent, replaced by something unseen yet unstoppable, the turbine. The new machines worked beneath the surface, invisible, efficient, ruthless. No longer did the mill need to bow to the river's mood or the season's mercy. The turbine captured every drop, every ounce of pressure, and turned it into progress. It was the end of an age and the beginning of another. The poetic hum of the water wheel was replaced by the hiss of steam and the drone of iron. Fire, flour, and the fragility of power. But progress is never without peril. Flour, that symbol of life, carried death within its dust. One spark, one slip of iron against stone, and the air itself could ignite. In seconds, a mill could become an inferno, a white-hot storm of flame and flour. Timbers turned to ash, gears melted, and the air filled with the scent of smoke and scorched grain. The same power that fed a nation could also destroy it. And yet, they rebuilt. Every fire was a lesson, every ruin a reminder that progress demands both courage and caution. The mill and the community. Beyond the gears and the dust, the mill was always more than a machine. It was the center of life. Here, farmers gathered at dawn, waiting for their turn at the stones. Children played by the stream, chasing the spray of water. Women traded stories as they waited for flour, their laughter mixing with the creak of the wheel. The miller stood among them, part craftsman, part keeper of time. His trade was trust. His work fed families. And even as iron took hold, the human bond between the mill and its people endured. Myths, sayings, and the spirit of the mill, from the mill came more than flour. It gave us language, wisdom, and metaphor. Keep your nose to the grindstone, they said. A call to focus, to endure. An honest miller, they whispered, though some said there was no such thing. Every creak of the wheel, every rhythm of the stones became a proverb, a story, a song. In these sayings, the mill lived on, not as machinery, but as memory. Centuries later, when the hum of turbines and engines drowned out the rivers, people began to look back. Old mills stood abandoned, roofs collapsed, wheels still, but their ghosts remained in ivy-covered ruins, in the whisper of rivers that once powered empires. And so, craftsmen and dreamers returned. They rebuilt what time had nearly taken. With every chisel and hammer, they resurrected the heartbeat of their ancestors. To preserve a mill was to preserve a story, a testament to endurance, and to the hands that turned nature into nourishment. Westward the mills, the new centers of power. As America grew, the rivers of the East could no longer contain its hunger. The mills moved west, following the grain, the railroads, the promise of endless land. On the banks of the Mississippi, new giants rose. Minneapolis, the city of flour, thundered with iron rollers, steel gears, and the might of turbines. The quiet mills of the colonies had become industrial cathedrals, temples of progress, where motion itself was sacred. From the wooden wheels of the past to the roaring turbines of the Midwest, The mill's spirit never died. It simply found a new river to turn. In the beginning, it was water that gave us power, then wood, then iron. But beneath it all, it was always the same rhythm, the steady pulse of motion, the hum of creation. The mill was never just a building, it was a reflection of us, of our drive to shape, to build, to endure. The creak of a water wheel slowly fades into silence. Even now, when the rivers run quiet and the wheels no longer turn, the heartbeat of early America still echoes. In every engine, every gear, every dream of progress that refuses to stop.